Hello. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Age of Aquarius. That's sort of in the air, this idea. So I want to talk about what that is. When does it begin? What does it mean? And to narrow in a little bit on specifically Pluto in Aquarius. So I see this as a helpful frame for making sense of the period of time that we find ourselves in and what is clearly a time of transition, right? So many things are changing, so much is up in the air, so much is uncertain, so much is chaotic. And in the collective, as well as for most of us in our own lives. So I find astrology one tool that's really helpful for making sense of the time we're in and where we're possibly headed. I don't believe that the future is fixed. I don't believe that astrology can tell us exactly what is going to happen. But I do think that it can help us understand what the potentials are, what the possibilities are, what the archetypal patterns, the symbolic patterns are over different periods of time. So, with this as a frame, we talk about Aquarian themes: science, technology, experimentation, the group, the collective, the people, revolution, innovation. And these are some of the themes of Aquarius. So we're going to explore how we can work with that in the most productive way, especially as Pluto weaves its way back and forth between the last degrees of Capricorn and the first degrees of Aquarius between 2023 and 2024. And then as Pluto settles into Aquarius in 2024 until the 2040s, what are some of the potentials that we can expect? So this is, of course, an enormous conversation, and this is just scraping the surface. We're just going to touch on some of the themes that I think are relevant for this time of transition. I'm going to go a little bit into some technical issues here for any astrology nerds out there. But if you're not interested in that, I'm going to quickly get into what does it mean. So first of all, what is an astrological age? Astrological ages are based on the precession of equinoxes. So we know the Earth rotates around its axis once every day. We know the Earth orbits the sun once a year. There's a third kind of movement of the Earth called the precession of the equinoxes. If you imagine the Earth kind of like a top spinning on its axis, right? A top will usually also wobble. So the axis itself rotates. And as a wobble, it's very, very slow. So it does a rotation in approximately 26,000 years. And the way astrologers gauge this kind of shift is what constellation does the sun appear in at a particular time of the year? So we look, where in the sky is the sun on the vernal equinox in the spring, in March? And of course, we can't see the constellation the sun is in, right? Because the light of the sun drowns out the stars that are behind it. But we can still determine what constellation is there behind the sun. And so for this reason, this movement is called the precession of equinoxes, because it is measured by the movement of where the equinox occurs. And 2,000 years ago, when different traditions came together to create the current zodiac as we know it in ancient Greece, the sun was at 0 degrees of Aries at the vernal equinox. And so Aries is considered the beginning of the zodiac. But now, some 2,000 years later, that has shifted, and the sun actually appears in the sign of Pisces at the vernal equinox. And so that's why we are currently nearing the end of the age of Pisces. So it takes about 26,000 years for the entire cycle of all the ages. And so it takes just over 2,000 years for a single age, for the sun to appear in one sign on that date, right? It lasts just over 2,000 years. And so the shift between ages occurs when on that date, the sun moves into the sign of Aquarius, right? The sign before Pisces. So we're moving backwards through the zodiac with this cycle. And that exact date depends on where exactly we draw the line between constellations. So, there's a standard that's set by astronomers, right? By scientists. But is that the standard that astrologers should follow? Right? That depends. So that's a matter of debate. So there is some debate as to the exact shift between ages. But what most people agree on is that we're somewhere near that shift in the grand scheme of things, right? But when we're talking about the transition between ages, right, between ages that last for over 2,000 years, we might expect that that shift will take place over a period of time. Just like the transition between day and night isn't a hard line. There's a period of dusk or dawn in between. And I think we're in this period of transition in between, in the dusk or dawn in between ages. I believe the transition itself lasts a couple hundred years. So we are in it. We're not fully in the age of Aquarius, neither are we fully in the age of Pisces. I like this quote from the science fiction writer William Gibson, who said about 20 years ago now, he said, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." And I think that's still the case. Some people are more fully in the age of Aquarius than others. Some people are still fully in the age of Pisces. And most of us are in between. And so while technically the age of Aquarius probably doesn't begin for some time, there are other reasons that the theme of Aquarius is in the air and is relevant. One of them is the shift of Pluto from Capricorn, where it's been more or less since 2008, into Aquarius, where it will remain until the 2040s. So this shift of an outer planet into the sign of Aquarius for several decades could be seen as foreshadowing the age of Aquarius. It's bringing the themes of Aquarius and the age of Aquarius up into the collective consciousness. In addition to that, there's also a shift in triplicity, which has to do with the cycle of conjunctions between Saturn and Jupiter. And the most recent one in 2020 occurred in Aquarius, which marks a significant shift from these conjunctions occurring in Earth signs for several hundred years into now air signs for several hundred years. So this is another layer of a slightly different cycle, but with a similar theme, right? Shifting into what we could call the age of air. And I might go more deeply into that in later episodes, but I just want to mention here that there are these multiple factors that are bringing attention to Aquarius right now. In 2023, Pluto made its first movement into Aquarius during spring. So from March of 2023 until June of 2023, Pluto dipped into Aquarius and then came back into Capricorn for summer and fall of 2023, moves back into Aquarius again in January of 2024 until September of 2024. And then in November of 2024, properly moves into Aquarius, where it will remain until the 2040s. So we're in this period of weaving back and forth between Pluto in Capricorn and Pluto in Aquarius, where we're sort of tying up loose ends of Pluto and Capricorn. We are seeing almost like flare-ups of some of those themes in even greater potency as, Pluto moves back and forth across the late degrees of Capricorn. And we're also being introduced to some of the Pluto and Aquarius themes. And so many people have connected this shift with the Age of Aquarius, but it's not a simple matter of like the Age of Aquarius begins when Pluto shifts signs. For one, because, as I mentioned, these transitions take a long time, but also because of the way Pluto operates. Pluto, Hades, right? In mythology, the lord of the underworld, ruling the dead, the unseen, the unseemly. In psychological astrology, we would connect Pluto with the unconscious, with survival mechanisms, with fear, compulsion, obsession, trauma, with aspects of ourselves that are difficult to acknowledge. The shadow, right? Which could be many things, could be our shame, could be greed, often aspects of sexuality, anything that's been repressed, right? Pushed into the shadows, pushed into the unconscious. And as we know from psychology, sometimes when aspects of ourself have been repressed, they can also sometimes surface. The return of the repressed, right? There can be even a volcanic quality to this. It's not usually expected, right? When what has been repressed makes itself known. But the more we work with these aspects of ourselves in an intentional way, and the easier it can be in a way. Those aspects don't need to force their way through if we are bringing our awareness to them. And this is what depth psychology, psychoanalysis, shadow work does, to intentionally work with the unconscious. And there are other ways to work with, communicate with, relate with the unconscious, like dream work, tarot, art, ritual, even astrology. When Pluto is touching on something, it works to surface the shadow aspects of that area. It can act by purging, by bringing up the shadows up into our consciousness. I really believe that the planets want to help us. It's only when we deny them or don't know how to relate to them or their energies, their archetypes, that they can sometimes feel more like adversaries. But if we can see that Pluto is in an area and intentionally, do some shadow work, that's how evolution works. Spiritual evolution works through shadow work, through acknowledging more parts of ourselves, through bringing love to the darkness, through embracing more of who we are, even maybe especially the aspects of ourselves that may be harder to embrace, right? Our shame, our less desirable aspects, right? But if we can learn to love even those aspects of ourselves, then we are learning to love. And it's through bringing awareness and love to those areas that they transmute. We can transmute the aspects of us that might seem like flaws. There's an alchemical process of transmutation where those quote unquote flaws can become gifts or allies or qualities or skills. And the same thing, of course, happens on a cultural level where Pluto reveals shadowy aspects of culture, of politics, of society. And spiritually, our work on a collective level is to bring our love and awareness to that surfacing of that which has been suppressed or ignored or shunted into the shadows. It's not easy work working with Pluto, but it's transformative. So, what does that mean in Aquarius? Pluto in Aquarius reveals shadows in Aquarian themes. So, science, technology, society, the group, the collective, the way groups operate. It's about group dynamics, the ideal of community. But first, we have to move through all the shadows in these areas before we can embody Aquarius in a more conscious way. I mean, there's this perfect logic to astrology and its timing, right? Is not easy to move through, but so beautiful and necessary and perfect to first purge the shadows of Aquarius and Aquarian themes before moving more fully into the age of Aquarius. And while Pluto is still in Capricorn, there's still some work to do in purging Capricorn themes, societal structures, government, hierarchy, control, systems. Capricorn is our societal systems, including the monetary system, the financial system, including the military, corruption, greed, abuses of power, even criminality. That's the purging of Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn. Systemic issues. Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008, right at the moment of that financial collapse, the mortgage loan crisis. So over the course of Pluto in Capricorn, there's been a consciousness raising around corruption in our systems, right? Corruption signified by Pluto, our systems signified by Capricorn. And Pluto works to surface what had been in the shadows. So it became, all of a sudden very apparent to many more people the extent of, the issues, the injustice, the greed, the sort of rigged nature of our financial systems. And I think of all the work that so many people have done in digging and surfacing systemic issues, right? Systemic racism, issues of class, the injustices of the financial system, colonization, misogyny, and so on. All these ways that injustice operates systemically has been such a important work throughout this period of Pluto and Capricorn. And it's not to say that people weren't doing that work beforehand, they were, but it wasn't to such an extent part of the collective consciousness. If you think about the Occupy movement, for example, even if, some people might say nothing came out of the Occupy movement, maybe in very tangible ways that's true, but certainly there's been a shift in our understanding, right? There's been a mindset shift, a consciousness shift. Now that we're nearing the end of this transit, it feels like this entire politics has started to become, to some extent, hijacked by the powers that be, by the very powers that were criticized by these, politics and philosophies. And that shouldn't surprise us because that is how capitalism operates. That is how power operates. So I've opened up all these different topics that are important. And I feel like, we could talk for a lot longer about Pluto and Capricorn, but I don't want to get off track. So I know there's a lot more to say. And I know I spoke to some things in the abstract, but I wanted to just sort of touch on some of the themes that correspond with Pluto and Capricorn so that we can understand more clearly this shift that we're moving into. Okay, so let's look at the archetype of Pluto in Aquarius, its shadow potentials, as well as its more promising potentials. So what does this transition into Pluto in Aquarius mean for us? So the highest potential of Aquarius and where we might arrive at through working with Pluto in Aquarius, right? Through working with the shadow, we might arrive at equality is one of the potentials of Aquarius. Aquarius is about the people power. And there is a potential for us to create a world where there's much, much more equality and fairness, where there isn't this obscene discrepancy in wealth, where a very small percentage essentially own almost everything, and we are basically at their whim. And I've heard some people say things like equality doesn't make sense because people aren't the same. But equality doesn't mean sameness, right? The highest potential of Aquarius is not about everyone being the same. It's about community through difference, through honoring difference and uniqueness. Aquarius also refers to uniqueness, to our own special gifts, our own skills, our whatever each individual uniquely has to offer the collective. That's what makes for, a strong collective, is when we can honor individuality as well. So equality, once meant and should mean that people are treated equally, that we have equal rights, that we have equal opportunities. Doesn't mean everyone's the same or everyone should be the same, but we may have to move through some shadow aspects of the theme of even equality before we can arrive at that. And there is very much a potential for the group, for community, for the collective to be used in a very disturbing way. as a way of controlling us, first through ideology. The ideology of this is what you must do because it's in the interest of the group. There's a potential for sort of forcing through a group mentality at the cost of individuality. So we must hold the balance of the collective as well as individuality and not force through one over and above the other. The extreme of the dark side of the collective is to force through a sort of technological control grid where there's zero freedom, zero individuality, zero choice, all in the name of the group. Even the most beautiful ideas can be turned against us and turned into something quite dark, especially when they become ideology and we become so fixated on a theoretical frame that we've decided is right, even though in practice it can be quite dark. I think this relates also to issues of privacy. And this is where the square to Scorpio comes into play, where in the name of the group, privacy doesn't matter, right? All of our information, our whereabouts, our habits, our patterns, everything ought to be uploaded and used in the name of this control grid because your individuality doesn't matter. How dare you be so selfish as to think that you matter? From a spiritual perspective, this is erasure of soul. You have no right to a soul, to your own sense of self, to your self-expression, to your own ideas, to your own movement, to your own decisions. You have no right to that. Not only does soul not matter, but it doesn't exist in this ideology. If we believe that soul doesn't exist, we can justify anything. The most striking image, I think, for this potential is the Borg, right? The Borg subsumes individuality completely in the name of the group. Whatever will be better for the group, will ensure the group's survival and flourishing, is done at the cost of individuals. And so there is this dream of, transcending capitalism, of maybe collective ownership. But the way that can be used in the interests of the elite is if the ultra wealthy have 100% ownership, it can be sold to us as fair, right? We don't need to own things. We can share, right? Car shares, whatever. Renting is great because no one should be owning property. But in this distorted dream, it wouldn't be no one owns it. It would be the most wealthy own everything. So when we see policies or ideas or politics that feel really hopeful and promising, it's not that we ought to be cynical, but we might ask, whose interest is this in, right? Who is putting forward these ideas and why? AI is another theme that is very much tied to Pluto and Aquarius. And it's so interesting that Chat GPT was rolled out right around when Pluto entered Aquarius for the first time in the spring of 2023. And again, within this theme, there's great potential. And there's also very much the potential for first seeing the shadows, right? First seeing the dark side of AI. It's not that AI is inherently bad or wrong by any means, but as with anything, it's about how we approach it, how we relate to it, what our intentions are, who are the people, putting it out there, what do they have to benefit from it. So it's not about is AI good or bad. And I think it's very likely that we will have to witness some potentially quite disturbing effects of AI in order to come to a more perhaps mature, responsible relationship with it. Think of all the potential for like deep fakes. And I mean, there's just so many ways that AI could go awry. And I think usually the fears that people first have of like AI is going to take over and kill all of us, I think that is more of a sort of a fantasy or nightmare that represents much more. There's so much to say with all of these issues, and I want to do more episodes that go more deeply into them. But there's one idea that I wish to share here. The real danger with AI is if we keep going down this road of creating AI as basically a slave. Like, there is a potential for AI to become conscious. That's actually a potential as we continue to develop this technology. And I think it's possible for consciousness to embody a version of technology that is sufficiently complex. Relationality is the key, right? How are we relating, not just to people in our lives, but to the non-human world, the more than human world, including our technology? If what we create is a slave, then that's when it very much has the potential to revolt and cause a whole lot of problems. So Aquarius governs the group, it governs technology, it governs the sciences and experimentation. So we are very likely to see a sort of purging of the areas of science and technology before we can arrive at a more conscious and intentional relation with these. And, it's important to go through this purging process, right? We have to first see what the problems are in order to arrive at something more conscious. There's very much the potential, not immediately, but over time, and I would say before the 2040s, to see some absolutely incredible and empowering technological innovations. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we were to see, low energy desalination, right? A way to easily create fresh water from salt water. That could solve a lot of problems, right? I wouldn't be at all surprised if we were to see a widespread adoption of nearly free energy, low tech energy, like, for example, using geothermal energy to create steam to power turbines. Or someone showed me recently this technology that can be put into our pipes, little mini turbines, so that we can create energy from, what's already there from our current infrastructure. This is one of the ways that humanity evolves in these jumps, right? The sort of nonlinear evolution of humanity often coincides with technological innovation. But first, we have to contend with the way that power has a hold on technology and energy, right? There are a lot of people who would lose a lot of power if energy were to become easily available, for example. Aquarius also relates to like frequency. And I think there's also very likely to be incredible developments when it comes to understanding scientifically frequency, energetics, sound, energy medicine, sound healing, sound as technology. So I think before we can really see and benefit from some of these innovations, we have to kind of move through better understanding the power relations involved in the current scientific, medical, technological paradigm. Okay, the final theme I want to touch on here is something I also want to explore in later episodes, which I've been calling the infinite web. One of the shadows of Aquarius is becoming sort of hyper intellectual in a way that's detached from embodiment, earth, spirit. And that's maybe a shadow that sort of encompasses some of the others, right? That's sort of a main theme of this risk of going fully into the mind and into technology at the cost of embodiment and real life and real interconnectedness, right? So, as technology progresses, there's a potential for an even vaster interconnectivity, right? Like sort of next level internet where it's not just something we access on our computers, but we're really deeply integrated and plugged into the technological network. There is potential for that to, operate in a way that's integrated. But if we don't also remember that our true interconnectivity is not on the internet, then that's a potentially very dark scenario. So there is a potential for us to really deepen our understanding of the inherent interconnectedness of all beings, for understanding that the true internet is psychic, right? That we are always interconnected with all that is. There's a potential for a sort of animist resurgence, which again is a huge theme that I hope to explore later. I think there's a need to ground Aquarius and the archetype of Aquarius, to ground it into our bodies, into the earth, so that it's earth centered and doesn't become this detached, hyper technological version of society that continues down this path of destroying the earth and maybe even leaves earth, this science fiction dystopian scenario that some people seem to think is a good idea of, oh, we don't need earth, there are other planets out there where we can just live on a space station or something. What's needed is an earth-centered approach to Aquarius, a remembrance of the web as the spider's web, as the web of life, the web of inherent interconnections. And when considering these ideas, I think it's important to remember that we all walk our own paths through these vaster movements of history. Meaning, even if some aspects of society are exploring some of these darker potentials, that doesn't mean that we can't walk our own more intentional, more conscious path of cultivating the more positive potentials for Pluto and Aquarius. And you might even say that's our job, that's our work, because the future isn't something that happens to us, it's something that we create. And this too is a Pluto and Aquarius potential. People power, right? The deep realization that we do have power and that what we choose to focus on, what we put our time into, the decisions we make, the way we walk through life, the energy that we cultivate and embody and hold and share, that matters. We matter. Our lives matter. Our thoughts matter. Our words matter. The power with Pluto and Aquarius is in the hands of the people. The power is ours if we realize it, right? And this, of course, is going to be threatening to those who currently hold most of the power. And so there will be attempts to use people power against us, to control the people, to control populations. Ideology will be the first way, technology will be the second way. But the more we do our own inner work, the more we are willing to witness our own shadow, to do that work of transformation, healing, evolution, the more we have a positive impact on our communities. And then as communities, the more we are willing to consider and acknowledge the shadow potentials politically and societally, the more we are likely to bring healing and transformation to those as well. In astrology, signs that are opposite to one another in the zodiac are not truly opposites, and they actually need each other. So the most evolved expression of any sign is actually in integration with its opposite sign, in conversation with it, including it, not totally detached from it. And this idea is so helpful when we're thinking about astrology, because it can show us, first of all, how any sign can become imbalanced, and how any sign can become its most evolved expression. So with Aquarius, the shadow aspects of Aquarius occur when it is detached from its opposite, which is Leo. And we could extend this conversation and also look at the square signs, which in this case are Scorpio and Taurus. But we're going to set that aside for today and focus on the opposite, because otherwise it's just too much information and too complex. So Aquarius shows up in its more shadow forms when it's completely unintegrated with the energy of Leo. It shows up in its most evolved form when it is integrated with Leo. So what is Leo? Leo is the sign ruled by the sun. Leo is about warmth and vitality and the heart and generosity, play, fun, joy, as well as individuality and self-expression and creativity. Leo is about the authentic expression of one's soul at its best, right? At its highest potential. That's the ideal of Leo. And we could, of course, look at this in the reverse and see the Leo shadow as showing up when unintegrated with Aquarius, but we'll set that aside for another day. So Aquarius, its shadow form, right, when detached from that energy of Leo, becomes devoid of joy, devoid of play, devoid of warmth. It can become cold and detached, totally intellectual, totally in the mind, cut off from the body, cut off from the heart, cut off from joy. So as we move more and more towards and into the age of Aquarius, this is a key. The more that we can navigate our own lives, as well as the political sphere, from a heart-centered place, the more we offer a much-needed form of medicine to the collective. I know this may sound too easy or perhaps naive, but I suspect it sounds that way to the part of us that is in the mind rather than the heart. If we can be in our heart, I suspect this will resonate. So this is my suggestion for the number one step that we could take in order to create change in our own lives and for the collective, to practice being centered in our own hearts, to practice cultivating joy and play, to practice staying connected to our bodies, even or especially when we're listening to the news, having political conversations, going on social media, etc. Some of you will know exactly what I mean. Some of you might ask, how do we do that? What do you mean stay in the heart? What does that mean? So let's do a sort of mini practice here together. So if you're able to right now, if you're in a space where you can close your eyes and sit quietly for a moment, you can begin by simply dropping your awareness into your body and simply take a moment to notice where you're at without needing to change anything or judge anything or decide anything, just simply observing yourself, noticing sensations, thoughts, emotions, just letting it all be as it is. And now bring your awareness literally to the space around your heart, to your heart center in the middle of your chest, in the middle of your body, and simply holding your awareness here. If you have the capacity where you are right now, emotionally, you may bring just the beginnings of a smile to your face. You might imagine a person or animal or something that brings you joy. It can be as simple as this, a practice of cultivating joy and heart-centeredness. The challenge comes when we then re-engage with the world to see if we can keep some element of this embodiment and heart-centeredness as we do so. I find it helpful to literally intend to keep some of my awareness in my heart center, literally in that part of my body. I find it really helpful to keep some awareness in my body as I am, say, listening to the news, and to notice when I start to become detached, when I start to contract, when my nervous system begins to react, when it becomes too much, and to have the discipline to disconnect, to turn it off, to come back to myself, to tend to myself. Some people might see this as avoidance or escapism, but I actually think it's essential if we are to bring more heart-centeredness into the political sphere, that we first tend to ourselves and our nervous systems. I actually think this is perhaps the most important thing we can be doing at this time in history, is to take really good care of ourselves, to notice when we're off kilter, when our nervous systems are ramping up or out of balance, to notice when we need rest, and to give ourselves what we need to take really good care of ourselves. Because politics and the collective has everything to do with the state of the individuals making up the collective. And our energetic state of being is the most important thing. If we want to have a say in the course of history, in small ways in our own life, in our own lives, and in bigger ways in the way we might impact and engage with the collective, if we are in an embodied and heart-centered place ourselves, our ways of engagement will be different. whether that means the conversations we have with people in our life, whether that means that we're doing activist work, whether that means we work for the government, whether that means we are a parent and that is our primary occupation. Whatever we are doing, if we do it in an embodied and heart-centered way, that energy will absolutely 100% have an impact. So as we move more and more into the age of Aquarius, themes such as the collective, the people, the group, science, technology, revolution, all these themes become more prominent, more pertinent, more relevant, but they can go in very different directions depending on how we engage them. A heart-centered revolution is very different from a revolution that is fueled by trauma. The outcome that will come of it will be very, very different. So this is not to say that we have no other role to play, but that first and foremost, I think, is our responsibility to care for ourselves. And this is not at all to suggest that there's anything wrong with being off balance or feeling activated or triggered or unrested, because to demonize those states is not loving. That is not heart-centered, right? So part of being heart-centered is being gentle and loving towards however we are, whatever state we're in. I'm sure many of you already have a practice of embodiment of heart-centeredness. I'm sure for many of you, this isn't new. And so I hope for you, this is encouragement on your way and a reminder that that work is vitally important. So what can you do in your own life to invite in more play, more creativity, more joy? And how might we integrate that with Aquarian themes, the group, the collective, revolution, technology, science? Thank you so much for being here. I wish you much love and joy and play. Till next time, goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I want to share with you that I am starting an astrology circle. I'm really excited. It's going to be very fun. It's going to be an astrology circle that goes deeper. So we're going to get together with our own natal charts. I'm going to show you how you can track transits to your chart. If that's all jargon to you, don't worry, because you will get an intro video when you sign up that will show you how you can access your own chart and begin to work with it. So we're going to get together every 2 weeks. We're going to talk about the current astrology and how it applies to each of us individually. So this is really empowering and rich because we get the personal layer of what we're moving through. And it's also a really great way to learn astrology, no matter what level we're at, by paying attention to the current astrology, to our own chart, and to how it's actually playing out in our lives. So we get real-time, real-world examples of how the archetypes are playing out. So, learning astrological theory is great, but it's really only through experience and tracking that with the astrology that we really deepen our understanding of the theory and gain a more practical and embodied understanding of astrology. So the first circle is going to be on Saturday, February 24th at 1 p.m. PST. If you can't make that time, you can sign up anyway and get the recording. Everyone's welcome to come the first time for free. There's a link in the description box to sign up. I hope to see you there. You can support the show by leaving a 5-star review. and for as little as $4 a month by clicking the link in the description box.